Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Life Talks. Today I have returning guest Redmond, all the way over from Africa. We spoke episode 21. Redmond, thanks for joining me, brother.
Man, it's good to be back. I recall the discussion like it was yesterday, and I'm happy to get chatting to you again.
Yeah, so do I. And to just dive into it, I have here a clip from when we spoke, and this is
what's
the
happened in
audio is
your
not
life and
working,
what you've
but
been through without even
you
talking about
speak
God.
here in this clip
Because your
about
testimony
your
comes from
testimony.
God. Every
Your testimony
setback
comes from
is your
God.
comeback.
Every
So your
setback is your
testimony,
comeback.
like I mentioned to you the
Your
first time we spoke,
testimony,
I wear it on my sleeve.
you wear it
Your
on your
testimony is the
sleeve. So
greatest
essentially,
weapon
you're
that you
just
can ever
speaking
fashion
here
against.
about testimony and how that is such a great weapon. And when you spoke about it, I didn't really understand. Like I did a little bit, but now I really understand. And what I mean by that is that you know, rather than trying to change others as the world does, or trying to convert people, your best your best um, your best weapon is your own experience. And if you're honest with it and you express your own mistakes, your own and you do it through humility, and you start to see yourself, you see who you truly are, who God destined us to be, versus this weak, pathetic, proud, arrogant, lustful part of ourselves that has to die.
Yeah,
So maybe if we can just kind of start there, if you can just touch on, you know, again, what does that mean again, to just to touch on that.
yeah, man, such an important thing. And one thing I love about that testimony that we have, it's constantly ever evolving. So we have a testimony of where we found salvation in Christ that we get to share, that I love sharing about. What do I mean by the fact that it's ever evolving? Because when we overcome one generational curse. So for me, it was alcoholism, it was substance, a few different things that led me to having a testimony that I get to speak about and brandish as a weapon to men. As soon as you let go of the things of the past, the enemy evolves, like our relationship in our life. When we step into a new place of employment, a step of flourishing relationships, when we get rid of the enemy in one avenue, he decides to go back and get his homies and come back and torment us in different avenues of our life. You know what I mean? And back to the fact that the testimony is your greatest weapon, it's so important that the approach on utilizing your weapon of choice at the right time is done in the right manner and fashion, because you've also got to have spiritual awareness of how you use your testimony. You can't just go around Bible thumping and quoting scripture and telling people repent for your sins or burn in the wrong eternity. You know what I mean? So that takes spiritual maturity, because when you figure out the fact that we all have a wonderful gift and the fact that we get to go out and go make disciples as fishers of men, it's very, very intricate in how you go about doing that. You can't go and make disciples in the wrong place if the setting is not right. You can't go make disciples in a place where you find people in their worst, in the place of where they are the weakest. Do you understand? So
Absolutely.
when it's married to our identity, that's when it becomes tricky, because the people that we are trying to minister to and testify through with our testimony are the people that are currently brandishing an identity of the fact that I'm an alcoholic, I'm a drug addict, I am a transgressor, I am abusive, I have committed gender-based violence, I've done all of these things. And these people's identity is the fact that I'm not good enough because I'm one of those things, right? But the identity is the fact that I'm loved, I'm special, I am Christ's son or daughter. And the things I tell myself are a story of my life, just like a book. There are multiple chapters, multiple journeys. And the things you call yourself aren't identities, they are chapters, you know? So this is something we can break down, but testimonies are really something special. And once again, I'll stand on what I said in the first one. It's the ultimate form of us being able to glorify God. And yeah, I wouldn't be where I am, and I wouldn't have had the doors open to me of where I'm in my life if it wasn't for telling people about my story.
Yeah, and speaking of stories, I mean, we spoke the other night. I mean, we hear testimonies all the time from our fellow brothers who are going through just different chapters, as you said, in our lives, whether it be, drug or substance abuse. I mean, me struggling with lust.
Yeah.
How to, there's this kind of Christ way is it's in one sense rebuke. You know, we're not here to kiss each other's ass. We're to say, hey, this is wrong, right? But we don't do it, you know, in the spirit of you're wrong. We do it in the spirit of, like you just said, a testimony. I know it's wrong because I've done it, and this is what I've done. This is how I fucked it up. This is how I've done it the right way. And let me tell you, there's a lot of fruit when you do it the right way. I'm not coming at it like this, but you're free to live your life, you know, and there's this kind of freedom to do that. Maybe if we could shift gears to talk about, first of all, what you do. You know, for people who are listening, you're in Africa, specifically South Africa, correct?
Yeah.
And what do you meet with other men? You do. I know you said you don't like the word retreat, but what do you do with other men, and what kind of conversations do you have? You speak about generational trauma, right? So maybe if you can just touch on that, what you do with other men and how that really applies to everybody, because we all have these broken parts somewhere in our life, in our families, with our friends, and you can touch on that.
Yeah, man, fantastic. So I think I'll lead into telling you what I do by saying that generational curses are real, whether you accept and identify with a godly figure in your life. They are real things. If you don't identify with Christ, you might identify with the fact that you were born into a household that had a certain way of where you were treated, the way you were brought up, with your parents, without your parents, whatever it is. And all of these things have the ability to affect you. So when I speak about generational curses, is the fact that whether you are male or female, you have things that have been bestowed onto you through loving, caring family members that have been there for you and wanted the best in you. And you've also had things that were bestowed into you in the spiritual realm through not having a mother or a father, through being orphaned, through being abandoned, through your mother and father being alcoholics, not being the greatest examples or role models. I always use the example of Frank Gallagher from Shameless. Reminds me of my father. Frank Gallagher from Shameless was the head of the household, but he was the complete opposite of what a male role model was, right? And my generational curse was growing up in a household where there was no leader, there was no authoritative figure, there was no person from a male distinction guiding me and telling me this is your true north, this is what a man does. I had my mother, who I love, who still to this day means the world to me. But the fact is that a mother, a auntie, a granny, a sister, a niece play vital roles in our lives, but they can never be dad enough. They can never be man enough. They can love from a maternal instinct. They can care. They can teach, but they can never love from a masculine perspective and provide that comfort that a man can provide another man. And that allows me to lead into what I do. So I run a group. Oh, that sounds so technical. I run a company called the Vanguard of Men, the front-facing inventory. The first guys that go into, like the guys in the war, right? That march ahead knowing that they're about to step into enemy territory, right? And the Vanguard has been created as a mindset of saying, I want to have a guy on my right and a guy on my left, and we want to be locked in arms, and we want to march head on into a world that is ever changing, ever evolving, and that is ultimately dealing guys a lot of shit on a daily basis. Guys are struggling with something that I've only identified with in the last 2 years. I used to say that mental health is a rich people's problem. And I can now tell you that mental health is not, because I realize that as I've evolved as a man and my duties have changed, and ultimately the titles that I get in the world through corporate employment, through being in the church, through being a family man, the only titles that ultimately matter to me, that are the most important, that in every engagement and speaking engagement that I have, when I get asked to introduce myself, I always say I'm Redmond, and I'm not in business development. I'm not a motivational person. I'm not a leader. I am a father and I'm a husband. Those are the first two titles that matter to me, and those are the titles that are the most important. So that's why the Vanguard of Men exists. It's to create that next generation of leaders that will ultimately understand that we've had a lot of things given to us and bestowed to us that are not for us because they're from our past and they can be broken off. We can break those shackles. We can let them go and throw them wayside and step into something great. And the reason I've created it is because not a lot of guys understand that they are struggling with spiritual warfare, whatever you want to call it, with mental issues, with anxiety and depression. We live a life of being in denial. And once again, mental health for men is only something that's picked up in the recent years. It's a struggle. It's really, really a big struggle. The resources and opportunities for women and children have always been there to discuss mental health. But in the last few years, they've picked up, which I'm really excited about, because otherwise an organization like mine would not exist. So it is there to create, and like I said, retreat. I don't like that word. I want to say man camp. I want to say taking guys out to the wilderness and shutting them off from the reality of what social media sells them as a life, shut them off from this couch lifestyle that we get so used to, working a 9 to 5, coming back, having the remote, dictating how the house should run because I'm the man, right? I'm the man of the household, right? Happy wife, happy life, all those mindsets that we want to break. So it exists to teach men to deal with their mental health, to break those generational curses, and ultimately be better fathers, be better leaders. And the guarantee I give the people I speak to and that I share with in the corporate space is the fact that if you want to have better employees, if you sign me up, I can guarantee you that I will create better fathers and better husbands. And when they are better fathers and better husbands, they'll be better employees. That's just a byproduct. If you're flourishing and things are going well at home, ultimately you'll be better for the organizations you serve, through being subservient, through understanding that you have to be at the lowest to be at the highest. One thing one of our elders in church shared with me a few weeks ago that I absolutely love was saying that to be a servant, a Christ-like servant, you have to be willing to mop the floors. And a lot of people like to serve, but they don't want to mop the floors. They don't want to get into the dirt. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's quite a bit I've shared there. But in short, I run spaces for men to help them deal with their mental health. I'm not the most I've got is life coaching, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I've got a testimony. I've been an alcoholic. I've been an adulterer. I've been someone that took drugs. I've spent a lot of time in the casino. I've done the wrong thing time and time again. So if there's a guy telling me about a testimony and he's got some crappy excuse of why it won't work, why he's struggling, I can tell him, be there, done that, got a t-shirt. So my story and my leadership comes from a place of hurt, from having nothing, from being as broken as I could, and having someone that patched me up and put me together in a way that now I can help and explain and display servant leadership through being at the lowest of my life, So, yeah.
Yeah. Just to break off that last word, servant leadership, right? Because the Son of Man did not come to be served, but serve, right? He came to and this is such a difficult pill to swallow. And you actually said what seemingly is as opposed to happy wife, happy life, and I'm the man of the house, right? These are two issues of not, because I'll speak for myself. It feels good when I'm in that role where I'm the man. But if I impose that on other people, I'm the man. Well, every other man wants to be the man too, right? So how do you navigate that? And to me, I found it's following Christ, as you said, a servant leader. So how do I elevate myself? I humble myself. I mean, this is, to me, this is just so powerful when you hear the words of Christ. He who is first will be last, and he who is last will be first. When you truly, as I've received that in my heart, it is so powerful, and it's so paradoxical, because it's like, well, how does that make? Well, yeah, I mean, you just think about it practically. If I try to be the man, I'm going to be this weakling. Why do I have to appear like I'm in control? Give up that control, but at the same time, as we spoke a little bit about this off camera, there's a lot of men out there too, where they're putting everyone first. They're putting their wives first. They're putting their kids first, and they're trampled on. And my heart goes out to both of those groups, because on one hand, it's a lack of really understanding leadership in the heart, right? Because I think there's a lot of women who hate that they can walk all over their men in the household, right? And there's a lot of women out there who hate that men are just walking all over them. I'm the macho man. I'm the leader of the house. So what would you say to some of the men who I know are going through the same thing? Because any man comes to conflict at some point of the life. You want to be the strong man. You don't want to overcome over people. But as we had a call the other night, we spoke with a gentleman who, it's like his whole life, dealing with the hurt that's come down from his mother. It's like, well, I want to be in control. My parents ran all over me. How do I be in control? And there's plenty of people who live out their whole lives. They haven't even seen that from a bird's eye view. What would you say to people, men specifically? How do you navigate that? How do you break those curses where maybe there's resentment for parents, or navigating how do I become that servant leader without being trampled all over?
Yeah, that's quite a bit to take in, and quite a few questions there that we can lead to answering. So the first part was the fact that there are many men that don't understand servant leadership, right? By being the right example. And it's not by coming to something like the Vanguard of Men, but there are many, many places that teach men about being less, right? Being humble. Accepting all these Christ-like quantities will elevate you. Qualities, not quantities, will put you in a position where your life will look at you and pursue you. And ultimately, for the Christian men, right? In order for your marriage to flourish, regardless of whether you feel like you are being trampled on, whether you are the head of the household and you are getting taken advantage of, if you are focused on that and not on Christ, then things aren't going to go according to plan. Because ultimately, in a marriage, in a biblical sense or context, your ultimate goal should be pursuing Christ, and in that finished work of the cross and his covenant of marriage, then you'll pursue each other by understanding what he says about you as an individual before you can learn to love someone else in a marriage. You know what I mean? And then I think about the fact that you mentioned the ladies also. So a lot of men will take advantage where there is a guy in the household and he is doing his utmost best, yet he's being trampled on. The wife is the leader. She's displaying certain qualities. Maybe she's doing things in the absence of what should be a masculine quality, in the absence of what should be a manly role. And she's fulfilling them because he's not stepping up. And it's not always because the guy's not stepping up. Once again, those generational curses we spoke about, don't just cling on to men. Generational curses cling on to everyone, men, women, and children. But for women, there's this rise of power, right? With we are equal, men and women. No, we are not. God created us in his image, which is perfect, right? But he created us equal, right? To him. We aren't equal in stature when it comes to male and female. We have our own qualities in men. We might be stronger. We might have hair on our face. We have certain qualities. Women are beautiful. They have different roles that they fulfill. And the enemy is trying to dilute that by saying we are equal. A woman is perfect in her right and a man is equal in her right. But when I go back to the generational curses of the household, you'll find out that those women and it might not be the case for everyone, but a lot of the time they would have come from a household. Maybe they were the older kid and maybe the only kid, and they were female, and they had a father or mother who was very stern and ruled with an iron fist, right? And they weren't taught about love. They weren't taught about those qualities of being a girl that's feminine, because they had to act and be a certain way because my dad was a certain way, right? And love is a learned behavior. You know what I mean? Same like racism. You aren't born out of the womb and become a racist. Something that's learned. It's learned through affection.
And I would say even more than racism, it's hatred of the heart. Because the enemy will use racism and homophobiaism and all these isms to just say, look how, like, to bring up problems that aren't there.
Exactly. So then the females, in this case, the ladies, what they end up doing is try to fill that void, because they were always fighting for first place. They were fighting because they were told this is not good enough. This is how you have to do this. This is how you have to carry yourself. This is how you have to work. Why aren't things in order? You have to be a certain way. Now you get someone who then gets married and now has to submit to someone when she's never been in a place of submission before. And to me, it's very, very difficult if you are unequally yoked. We also spoke about that leading up to the call. And the other thing was forgiveness. Forgiveness is such a tough thing. Like that pent up anger that we have from our childhood, the pent up anger that we have from unfulfilled expectations of our parents, the pent up anger that we have from not being good enough. A lot of us have those. I can tell you, I still fight that now as a grown man, as a father of 2 kids. I can tell you sometimes I've overcome so much in my life, but I tend to sometimes go back. As soon as you give the enemy a bit of food for thought, as soon as you give him a seed, he'll run rampant like a wildfire, you know? And we all fall victim to it from time to time. becomes really tricky. It really does. And it, forgiveness is something that I also spend a lot of time with, and it's a very complex thing to understand, because when we think about the forgiveness, we always want to respond from a place of getting even, because the world says, I forgive, but I don't forget. And you cannot forgive and say, I don't forget, because then is that true forgiveness?
No, I have the quote.
Ah,
It's love keeps no records of wrongs.
Yeah.
It's hard to live by. Love keeps no records of wrongs. And I listen to that and I go, how? And that's the enemy. It's not
Yeah.
easy, and that's, I think the forgiveness, we spoke about this the other night. People think of love and Christ's love as a lack of understanding, but because it's like kind of foolish, it's naivety,
Yeah.
but it's actually complete understanding. Because
That is.
forgiveness is to know if you can kind of just go into that, right? Because people who have that anger for a parent or somebody, it's revealing something within themselves.
And the world will see it as weak. The world will the world will tell you need to keep your guard up. You need to be strong.
And it should, though, because it proves who is really forgiving and who is, I ought to forgive. I'm a forgiving person, but in reality, they have hate in their heart.
No, they still carrying it. So it's just a public display of them
Yes.
wanting to act and have this persona of being better, being perfect. There's only one spotless lamb, and his name is Jesus. That he's the only one. The other thing is this: we look at Christ and his story as weak, as feeble, as someone that gave up, but it's the ultimate sacrifice. And he teaches us the fact that we should forgive, but in that, you can listen to the words spoken. Remember that book I told you about? You started reading it as yet?
I just got it for
Man,
people listening.
that's amazing. That's amazing.
Character
man.
of God's
working.
working.
Once you get into it, spiritual wisdom and maturity just comes daily. You're gonna love it. But back to the fact that we look at his example, and the world shows us that who is your king? Why is he so weak? Like he was referred to on the cross, right? He looked as weak when they asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews? Are you the king of the Jews?" You know what I mean? And I think about it now. We are in a position whereby we can forgive, but we shouldn't just allow people back in our lives that have done us wrong, because then we aren't being smart and we aren't using the wisdom of Christ that he's given us. When we say forgive, but I don't forget, that has a negative connotation. We can forgive, but not allow someone back into our life that has hurt us, that has put us in a position where we know it's not good for our mental health, because that person in my space gives me a certain amount of anxiety, fear, depression. And I know from the wrongs that they have done, I feel a certain way. So I can forgive them, I can bless them, and I can let them go. But it does not mean, because of Christ's example, I should allow them back into my life. Do you get what I'm saying there?
I do. How do you discern that with someone who rebukes you or challenges you? Because I think in our soft world, sometimes people will say the same thing, and they're coming at it from the perspective of like, he said something mean, I can't forgive them because they challenged my heart. Like, when you, like, that's why I say navigating this place where, because we believe in an objective truth, essentially. We believe that Christ is that objective truth, that he is the standard that we should live our life by. Now, that may piss off a lot of people. So how do you discern whether, I guess, the criticism from the people that we get, the hatred that we have in our heart towards another person who may have wronged us, is, how would I say, true hatred versus, because if somebody corrects us, but in the time we don't see that as a correction, we see that as an attack towards us. Yeah. And we say, I can't forget, like I forgive, but I have to be at a place. But we see in the future, they actually were coming from a good place. I look at that like my father. My father gave me advice. Yeah. At the time, I resented him for that advice. And now I get older, I say, forgive him. I mean, he was giving me the right advice, versus what, you're saying, someone who truly is, attacking, like consciously attacking, maybe. I'm not sure if I'm saying it the greatest way, but because sometimes essentially what I'm saying is sometimes we see this attack or this is as something that is they wronged us, but in reality they're actually rebuking us, which is the best thing that can happen. If I'm overweight and you say, Michael, you're fat, I can't forgive Redmond for saying that, but you know what I mean? So how do you discern between both of those? Like, constructive criticism.
One, eh? It's a real tough one. Like I think about that quote, right? You can take a horse to the water, but you can't make it drink. And at the end of the day, the more and more I walk my journey, the more and more I realize that dying to the flesh on a daily basis is something that is on a daily basis. I can't go and die to the flesh once a week, once a month. The more and more I don't spend enough time in the Word, the more and more I'm easily offended by things people say. I'm offended by the way people behave. I'm offended by their example of what is not a Christ-like role model, when I shouldn't be offended by anyone. I should be focused on my truth, the infallible, the absolute truth for me, right? Whether it's objective to them or not, right? And the more and more I follow being what a disciple is and being obedient and trying to best as possible, even though I'll always fall short, be an example of what Christ is like, the easier it'll get. So there's no one exercise or journey that takes you to a position of understanding biblical discernment and understanding what is something that is simply a rebuke from one to another, or something that is a rebuke, but through your flesh and your childishness, you cannot understand at the time because you've somehow fallen away from the word. Somehow you spent a bit too much time eating or drinking from the wrong well, because you spent a bit too much time doing the wrong thing, whether it's being on social media, whether it's watching too much Netflix, whether in fact you are defiling your temple. This thing of us saying our mind, body, and spirit speaks about a whole bunch of things. Like your consumption is not just what you eat, right? But everything around you. So once again, I think understanding for me is that a biblical discernment, because I can tell you, man, I was one of those people highly offended by everything people said or did. Sometimes to this day, sometimes I get offended. And then I have my wife. That's another wonderful thing, dude. Having a wife that is God-fearing, that is submissive, has been a great tool in my tool belt. Sounds wrong if I refer to my wife as a tool in a tool belt. Whoa.
No, well,
someone's
go
gonna
into
come.
that. What is that? What is the God-fearing? Because I think that turns a lot of people off, right? I know it did for me. I'm not say fully turn me off, but it was more of like I didn't understand, right? What does that mean, a God-fearing woman or God-fearing
So having God-fearing woman is my wife understands that she is married to me because she understands Christ before me, right? She got married to him before she got married to me. She understands that if she doesn't know him, love him, and live for him, she cannot know, love me, and live for me. You know that?
Yes.
So that to me is the fact that she is God-fearing, and I understand that at times I'll be weak and she'll be strong enough. At times she'll be weak and I'll be strong enough. But ultimately, if we aren't God-centered in our life, we're going to get it wrong. And every single time being equally yoked in our marriage, that I'm going through something, and it always happens to be family or those that you think are closest to you, and something is said or done, it's a bit difficult for me to understand. And she'll explain the complexities around the fact that sometimes our flesh speaks louder than the voice of discernment when we are going through something and it's someone we love, right? It's easy to rebuke someone from a distance, at arm's length, if they aren't a close friend, a family member. Like we also had a good chat about this offline. When we rebuke those closest to our life, sometimes it's so hard because the flesh needs to be eradicated, but then it's also the fact that what I say or what I do has the ability to leave ultimately life-lasting effects. I could lose them forever, but am I worried about losing them forever and the emotion that's displayed through what I think in the flesh? Or am I worried about which eternity they are going to go and spend their life in when their soul departs this vessel? So I don't know if that answered your question, but that got really complex for me. But once again, discernment,
No,
having a wife,
I think it did.
understanding it.
I mean,
It's just
the first thing you said was essentially it's not essentially you shouldn't be worried about how other people are going to interpret you. You know, you go within yourself, right? Your focus is on
exactly.
Christ, not proving to other people. And I've fallen short of that. You know, I want to correct other people, and then I have to take a real big look in the mirror, and there's this giant behind me called Christ who was saying, "Who are you to judge other people? What about all the things that your sins? Overcome those." And you don't have to. What I've realized is you don't even have to do anything. You set the example. There's something that says in the Bible that in the times of persecution, correct me if I'm wrong or add clarity, that the words will come. You'll know what to say to the authorities. You'll know what to say to those who persecute you if you're truly focused on Christ. And I've realized that in my life. The times that I focus on Christ the most, I know that I attack the enemy through humility, as you said before, the testimony, to be brutally honest that Christ is the standard for which we should live. We fall from that,
Exactly.
and the more that we're honest with that, the more that we'll be led the right way. But yeah, and the other thing that you said towards the end was essentially it's purpose over pleasure.
Yeah.
And when we
Ultimately,
lose sight,
are we here to feed the flesh? We know our God-given mandate, right? And that might not be for everyone watching the call, but those who are in their faith, they know that ultimately their God-given mandate is go to make disciples. You are a fisher of man, right? You aren't here to appease the flesh and worry about people's emotions. And I say that with all respect. Once again, if we refer to the start of the conversation, it has to come from a testimonial place. Once again, if you're going out with using the wrong tools for the day, you are going to get it wrong. In fact, you're going to be the worst person to come wrong and be that person that's going to end up saying, those are the Christians that I don't listen to. They are the reason why I don't go to church. You don't want to become that person. You want to show them, live a life of example. And if they know you, if they know your back, the back part of your story, and they can see, they bump into you, and they're like, wow, what has changed? Then you have the ability to minister. But just show them out of love.
yeah, and I realized that it becomes it's so difficult to do because I
Yeah,
speak in my own life when I would see someone who was an example, there was a part of me when I was young, I would resent that because it's like, what did that, and then I compare myself to others. That's how the enemy operates. I'm comparing myself to them. And as I've realized when the moments in my life where I've been the example, that enemy doesn't, maybe it's gone away within me, but it's still in other people. So people will judge you for being that light. And I think they should in the sense that what I said earlier, I think it provides in your testimony. Are you being the example or are you putting up a facade? Part of the thing is the purpose and pleasure aspect, as you said, with the emotions. When your focus is on the purpose, you don't care about other people's emotions, not from a cold heartedness, but you care,
amen.
as you said, you care
That's it.
about where they're going, and you do it because you understand your own. And you have to put to death, part of that death that you put to your flesh is the emotions within. Maybe if you can touch on that, is that what I mean by that is I think the enemy works through the thoughts and emotions. It makes you feel good to make you feel bad, right? I'm sure you've experienced right, the pride. I have a chart of consciousness. I've some of the books I have from David Hawkins. I think he does tremendously good work. Uh, Part of the emotions is pride and shame and guilt, right? It makes you feel good, an inflated sense of ego, feels good, feels good, feels good. And then shame and guilt, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that because deep down we know that we're not there's a part of us. I've been really reflecting on this. Shame and guilt is a really good thing because I believe that a shameless society is a corrupt society. We should feel shame and guilt. We should not live in shame and guilt. And we do not, I think that we can overcome it in two ways. And I think it's pride or courage. And courage goes hand in hand with humility. So when we've done wrong in our life, and that to me is essentially what church is. It's as it's, I love the quote, it's a hospital for sinners, not a what is it? Um, it's a hospital for sinners, not a clubhouse for saints, something along those lines.
Like it.
Yeah, and I think that is really an important aspect of knowing that because in our what does it say? It says when we are in our lowest, God is in his strongest, right? In our lowest moments.
Yeah.
right? So in those shame and guilt work, there's a place that can open up, and either we enter in humility or we
Yeah.
double down in pride to cover up that shame and guilt.
Yeah, and that's how the enemy operates, right? It's always from a place of uncertainty, and it's never in the now. It's always in the future, right? There's so many things that don't happen or don't come to fruition because we think about the what if, and that passion and purpose is really, really important. We tend to think too much about the emotional aspect of what we do, and then there's an inaction, then there's passivity, then there's us sitting back and not doing anything, right? So before we even and guilt and shame is tied to that. And I specifically speak about in the men's space, right? I actually heard someone speaking about it the other day, and it makes me think that the journey seems so complex to navigate, but yet so easy for inactive men or passive men. And it was Nate Norman on Twitter shared, and it's something I speak about all the time. It's like hyper masculine men, the Tates of the world, right? All these guys that tell you multiple women, you must own a Bugatti, you must do as much as you can, milk the world, use its resources, or it's either you must be feminine and really soft, and it's the paradox of Christ,
Yeah.
right? He's strong and courageous. He's the lion, but he's also the lamb. He's soft, he's kind, he's loving. And they've taken those two things, which is the perfect paradox, and now they've diluted it. And in that, guys don't understand that they pulled from one end to the other and they do absolutely nothing. They sit in wallow and self pity. And then that's when the guilt and the shame builds. But when I say wallow in self pity, I can tell you it's not every single guy out there. Vulnerability is another emotion that needs to be, it's a sense of being. Vulnerability is a sense of being. It's not an emotion like love and hurt. You need to learn to be vulnerable when you are hurt. So
Now-
hurt is the emotion, love is the emotion, but you can be vulnerable in either of those senses. So the sense of being in either of those emotions can unearth the things that lead away from guilt, humility, and pride. Does that make sense?
Yes. Just to challenge the thought, the vulnerability is something that I've realized that in my own life, being vulnerable to people, being vulnerable to the right people. This goes back to the discernment, because
Yes.
if you're vulnerable in the world to people, the world is willing to like. This is one of the ways the enemy operates. I've realized, because when you're vulnerable, it's almost like everybody's your friend. Oh, I'll be
Yes.
there for you, right? And there's this kind of over compassion, motherly aspect to it that I've realized in my life. And I put a video out on it, is speaking about paradox of perfection, right? Because in the Bible it says, "Go and be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." But the paradox is that we're all broken, we're all not perfect. So how do you navigate that? So in the same way, this idea that you should be vulnerable, but if there's not the wisdom behind it, you be vulnerable to the wrong people. I don't say the wrong people, but I mean, it's better to be vulnerable than have all the hate. But you're vulnerable, and then the world will tell you it's okay, it's okay, open up, we'll accept you as you are. Again, I think it's a similar answer to what you gave before. But how do you discern that? Because I think a lot of people, it's almost like unconsciously the enemy that's within them loves when someone's vulnerable, because once they're vulnerable, oh great, someone else is kind of fallen with me, and they don't encourage them. No, we're going to be stronger here, right? We're not meant to live here, right? Because that's one of the disguises of the ego. See, look how horrible life is. It's okay, just let it go. You don't have to fight these battles, and that's a lie. But at the same time, if you're not vulnerable with the right people, you have to drop that off your chest, and but is that making sense? Like, how do you again, that discernment? Because a real brother will say he's gonna break you down to beat you up, to build you up. He's gonna break you down to build you up.
Exactly.
So, and how do you know that the person has the best interest, right? Like, because
you don't. Off the bat, that's what I can tell you. You don't. You've got to trust. For me, I've got to trust the Holy Spirit that who I'm speaking to is the right person. And usually there's this unction or there's this conviction. If it's the wrong person, you'll be convicted about it. There's an unction if it's the right person. You'll know because they speak the way you speak. They have the same language. They are doing the things you want to see yourself flourishing. They are setting the right example of what you want to be, who you aspire to be. Like when you're at your weakest and you look at the moments of when they are their weakest, how do they show up? I'll tell you what I tell every single guy that spends time with us around the fire, right, at these camps that we host. The fact is that we teach a lot about forgiveness and vulnerability. And I tell them, when you leave here, guys, please understand that vulnerability is something that is not for everyone. Don't go and be vulnerable with your wife because that provides insecurity. You're the head of the household, the alpha, the authoritative figure. But when you're vulnerable, she will then look at you differently. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
You can't go tell her you're suffering with all these things. You need to first seek the counsel of a good brother. You need to seek the counsel of someone that's in your tribe, in your community, right? I can tell you a great story of how I was vulnerable to the right person who got placed in my life at the right time, right? So for the organization I do work for called the Character Company, where I recruit mentors to be mentors to young boys without father figures. I've developed great friendships with a lot of guys all over South Africa because I've recruited these guys through Christ-like principles. We call the guys FAT, faithful, available, and teachable. We only use Christian men. The second part of the acronym is available. Everyone's busy. You need to be available. You need to make time to serve, servant leadership. So if you say, oh, no, I'll see if I can serve, then you don't understand servant leadership. So you have to be faithful. You have to be available, understanding Christ's example for coming to die on a cross for us. And then you need to be teachable, eradicating pride, cutting the flesh, saying that I need to be rebuked. I need to be called out by a brother. So I'm out there recruiting guys and I'm thinking I'm doing the right thing. But in this space, I had a guy call me out, right? He have a great relationship. He's like, Redmond, how you doing? I'm like, oh man, it's been a while. Great to hear from you. He's like, I want to take you for breakfast. We go for breakfast. I'm like, he just wants to tell me about his mentorship and about the boys. So I recruited him. He's got a group of 3 to 5 boys. These boys are flourishing. I'm like, yeah, tell me about your mentorship, man. I love seeing your journey. You're posting the pictures of the kids. I love the fact that you are a lighthouse. You are a social father to them. You're teaching these kids to dream. He's like, yeah, that's all great. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about you. I'm like, oh, okay, great. What are we talking about? He's like, you're a hard man. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, I've seen the way you behave with your kid. And my kid was then 13. He's now 14. He's like, regardless of what your kid does, because sometimes when I have these camps, I take my kid with, and he spends time with me in the fellowship of men. And he's like, what you do is your kid does so much. Like whether he's washing the dishes, whether he's helping out at the camp, it seems like what he does is never good enough. And I want to call you out on that because he's doing his best. But you've never got something good to say about him. And here I am living a life where I've broken off the generational curse in my life by not having a father figure. And I always tell my kid, and now once again, I parent from a wound, breaking a generational curse, but the wound has been covered up and there's still a scar. Now I parent from that wound, and I always tell him, Caden, my example is right. Why, Dad? Because I didn't have a father and I'm your father, and you must trust me and you must love me and know that I'm doing the right thing. But guess what? When he goes to sleep at night, there's no hunger pains. When he goes to sleep at night, there's a roof over his head. He knows that he's got a mother and father. He doesn't need to be told every day that he has a father and his father loves him. Yes, those are important things. But I've cut off the generational curse from being abandoned and not having a father. And now in that, I help create men that become social fathers. I help repair relationships that help go and fix broken homes, make better fathers and better husbands. But the enemy now is trying to bring a curse in my life and create a new curse by not allowing me to be the father that I can in my son, and by being a hard father that ultimately turns him away from me. And I would have not understood this if I didn't have a brother rebuking me, telling me, listen, yeah, you are being too hard to this young man. Everything he does is not good enough. And I was taken aback. I had to actually sit down and think, wow, regardless of what he does, I never praise him. Yes, I praise him enough. Well done, I love you. But it's never good enough. It's never good enough. You know what I mean? And this guy had to call me out. And I still struggle with it to this day. Yeah, I am being vulnerable to you through something that I've been challenged by. And I would not have been challenged by if I didn't associate myself with the right people. So once again, if you are in a position where you are elevating others and you're using your testimony and you know that the people you are spending time with are good fathers, if you want to be a good father, good husbands, if you want to be a good husband, good employees, if you're missing the mark at work and you aren't meeting your KPIs and your deadlines as an employee. So if you associate with the right people, the vulnerable conversations will come naturally when you are exposed to the people that are flourishing and living and practicing those values of what that title dictates on a daily basis. Makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's well said. Um, how do you just to touch on what we spoke earlier? How do you shift the anger? Because I want to continue to touch on the generational curses.
Yeah.
Where can people start as far as, let's say, they have that resentment, that anger towards a parent or loved one? Where would you recommend them to start? I mean, do they open up the Bible, or as we spoke off the call, sometimes like people, a true to me, a true Christian is not going around throwing the Bible at people. He's trying to understand the heart of it and being the example. So where would you
Man.
recommend people who are like, I got this hatred, man, I can't let go of it, and I think we should wrestle with God. We shouldn't just be like, no, like, again, I don't want to just look like a forgiving person. I want to be a forgiving person. So where do people start with that?
Man, there's no coincidences when we talk, brother. I just realized that. My wife came home, and I need to tell you this story because it answers the question.
Okay.
My wife came home 2 weeks back, and she's like, hey, I've got these mates. They are planning to go to this place. And I'll tell you the name about this place and what this place does shortly. But I'm like, oh, you want to go to that place? And this is a place that represents anger and frustration because do you believe you can break things and smash things with love? Like, to me, I was like, I cannot take a monitor and smash it in pieces and say, I'm doing this because I'm so happy. I cannot take a shotgun and blow holes into things because I'm so happy, And this place is called Rage Room. It's this little social media thing that was trending a few years ago, and it started popping up all around the world. They've created a lucrative business where people donate old printers, faxes, fax machines, copiers, TVs, radios, bottles, glasses, whatever it is, and they put them in this perfect little setting, and everything's set up, and you go in and you get this arsenal of weapons, baseball bats, cricket bats, crowbars, shanks, whatever it is, and you get to go into this perfect picture of everything set up, and you get to destroy and smash everything. And I seen this way back, telling my wife, I've seen this thing in France and it's trending. It's called Rage Room. So you go there with pent up anger. You go into the room, you pay X amount of dollars or rands, and you wear an overall, protective goggles and gloves, and you smash the shit out of everything and you deal with your anger. And I looked at it saying, and I was a believer at the time, right? Saying, I want to do this and I want to create this in South Africa because I see it as a business opportunity. I was like, boom, all this money coming in, we're going to be rich, babe. We're going to be rich. You know what I mean? And it's like, let's do it. And then I was convicted by God saying no, because you're just telling people to smash things, but it might be a coping mechanism. It might be something that they're just using for a short period of time, but they're not dealing with the actual thing, which is a wound, right? You can't put a plaster over a gunshot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the reason I brought up this story about being convicted about it years ago and not creating it as a business, I'm talking 3 years ago, right? We all have, what if I did this? Would this thing have worked out? Like, I could have been a millionaire by now, if I thought about that opportunity, but I didn't because I realized that it's just a temporary sense of relief when it comes to dealing with your wounds and pains. So it happened. And then my wife comes home 2 weeks ago. She's like, oh, I'm going to Rage Room. I'm like, oh, the same place that you told me about years ago that is not something that we should do as believers, right? Anger, the word. And I don't need to go into the Bible and tell you what anger is and how one is referred to, but a fool, right? In the Bible, there's many accounts of verses that speak about a fool and using your anger at the wrong time and what anger does and what it provokes and what it brings out of us. So my wife ended up going there and smashing a whole bunch of shit. Breaking a room. She told me her and a mate dismantled the fridge. And this girl had so much anger pent up and she dismantled the fridge. like the insulated heat padding was coming out. She did a number on this fridge, right? And then me and my wife spoke. And then there in that moment, from 3 years ago, I felt a certain way. And she felt a certain way 2 weeks ago, prior when she made the book and said she's going with her friends. She felt a certain way. Not because she was going there, because she had rebuked me from wanting to do this and pursue this as the business. She got the revelation, and I got the revelation at the same time, being equally yoked, saying that we cannot heal the same. People heal differently. People heal through song. People who heal through therapy. People heal through working out. David Goggins heals through endurance and beating himself up and running ridiculous ultra marathons out in Death Valley, doing the craziest shit. And that's his healing. People heal differently. There's no one size fits all. You know what I mean? And once again, whether you are in Christ or not, Christ loves you and you are his son or daughter, you still have discernment. You are given gifts and talents to praise him and elevate him. Whether you don't praise him and elevate him, you still have those gifts and talents. You are also given discernment. You are given a mind. You are given knowledge, right? So me and my wife came to the revelation at the right time from 3 years ago and heard 2 weeks ago saying, people need to heal differently. So I can tell you, this is what I did to heal, but that might not work for you because you grew up in a happy home that was void of drugs and alcohol. I don't know who, I'm trying to think, who do you remember? I can't remember the show. Love and Marriage. Was that big in the States?
Yeah.
Ted Bundy, good old fashioned Ted Bundy. Man, that dude was epic. But the more and more I think about it now, man, he was so passive, just coming home every day, having his beer, sitting on the sofa. We were sold the lie. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But it was still a happy home. The kids were happy. The wife was happy. The man was happy. And in homes like that, you can be objective and say that they didn't struggle with drugs and alcohol and all the things that lead me to look for healing differently. So I looked for healing in alcohol, drugs, sex, adultery, all these things. Those people that have not gone through watching their parents do these things generationally, they might not need to heal from wounds that were left from alcohol, drugs, and sin in that nature or manner. But they might have lived in what looked like a perfect household. But the fact that the household was empty, the house was filled with individuals and fake smiles, but they never experienced and felt love. So my testimony in healing from being all these things, alcoholic, drug addict, and adulterer, will not heal someone who wasn't loved. So my form or explanation of what healing is completely different to what they're looking for. You know? So that example of the rage room made me realize that it might be physical fitness. It might be endurance. It might be smashing stuff, shooting rifles, loving on people. It might even be going to be an evangelist. Maybe you get healing from healing others through evangelism, going to the corners of the streets and getting told you all types of things. Just going to the streets and getting to tell people about the good news. That might be your healing. So once again, man, healing is a very, very complex thing. And I can tell you ultimately, the only time you're going to find true healing is once you understand who made you. You won't understand who you are once you understand whose you are. But once again, to someone that doesn't identify with the cross or Christ, it's baby steps. You can't just go and tell them that because they are looking to find out who they are through their earthly relationships before they can understand who Christ is in their life. So earthly, I had a mother and father. You're telling me about this God that loves me and pursues me. Why did he give me a father that molested me when I was 5? Right? Why did he give me that? Or my mother and father loved me, but why did my uncle molest me and they didn't protect me and care about me? You know what I mean? Like there's all these complexities when it comes to sharing forgiveness and sharing healing as a believer. And it's very, very difficult. And I cannot answer these questions. I simply cannot, And like Jesus did when he told the disciples, go out and I will give you the words and the wisdom at the right time. Every time I've been in a moment or in a position where I've needed to share the gospel and felt I do not have what it takes, I don't have enough, how will I answer this question that's just been posed to me? And there in that moment, the Holy Spirit delivers a wonderful word of wisdom and spiritual maturity that I could not get because at the time, God said, you need to eradicate the flesh and what you say will not be good enough. But just like the disciples, I will give you the words at the right time. You know? So I don't know if that answered your question, but man, healing is complex and
Yeah.
intricate and beautiful and loving. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, I did answer the question. And it makes me, it's bringing me to another question that we spoke on earlier,
Yeah.
which is how do we navigate the I have not come to bring peace but a sword. That's something that's been in my heart. I know you said it was on your heart, right?
Wow.
Because yeah, it's and for those who maybe aren't aware of it, Christ says that, there's this vision of Christ where he's this kind of a hippie, right? It's like happy, everybody be happy. Can we all accept each other? And there's an element of compassion and kindness that's important, but I would say equally important is the ability to speak truth. And when we speak truth, a lot of people have different versions of what truth is. And in my life, that understanding that Christ has to be the most important, it means very specifically more important than your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, that his words are the most important. And not because, again, not to be a Christian in disguise, not to be this holier than thou person, that you really understand what Christ was pointing to, that when you speak truth, and even if we speak truth on a practical scale, you say someone's fat, they say, no, I'm fat. I'm not fat. I'm big bodied and you should accept me for who I am. This is the same spirit to me, because once you say that, there's going to be two types of people. One person who says, I am, can you help me? And another person who says and rejects it or whatever. And everybody has a different chapter, right? So we don't take it personally, but as you grow in that truth, that hits hard to me, because that means that I'm going to have enemies in this life who are my friends, who are my family. And how do I navigate that? How do I accept that? Because that is, it's going to happen. What do you think about abortion? What do you think about LGBTQ? What do you think about, these things in the world that are being promoted a certain way? And how do you come at that with a Christ-like example? And Christ he would sit with anybody. He wouldn't look at, as you said earlier, through someone who identifies as black or white or gay or straight or Republican or Democrat. He would sit with each individual, I believe, and would say, and he would be that example. He would listen to their pain. He would listen to their struggle, the shame, the guilt, the negative emotions in their life. And he would call them to repentance, which means that you have to deny this part, that really the ego gets a thrill out of all these things. It gets a thrill out of being a victim and the world's against me and poor me, you must accept me. Well, if I peel back layers in your life, Redmond, I'll find some heavy shit. You peel back layers in my life, you'll find some heavy shit. Things that I'm ashamed of, things that if I had to do them over, I wouldn't do them again. But I had to go through that. I had to learn the experience of screwing things up, And I think, as you said, that's why I started this conversation with the testimony. I'm not saying testimony, because people will hear the word testimony, as I did when I was younger, be like, testimony. Testimony is your story. It's tell us your story. Have you screwed up? Have you made it right? And just be honest. Yeah. And maybe if we can, because we've been going for an hour here. It's very easy.
We have. This is good.
If we can touch on that, how do you that quote?
I think I get what you're saying, and I'm trying to explain it in the best way possible, because it's another loaded question, right? But and don't go about by telling someone the truth and just tell them the truth hurts and walks off, because that's going to cause more damage than more harm. So that's not the thing to say, folks. Truth hurts. Yeah, we know that, but don't say that. My thing is this: like, I think about, what do you have that's the most prestigious monument out there in the States? The White House. What is that? What would that
You're asking? I mean,
plenty.
White House, most prestigious, be argued from different people. Statue of Liberty, White House.
That's where people, like, if you invited there as a delegate and you go sit down and have a supper, like, you've made it, right? Or some fancy restaurants. A lot of different places or monuments or landmarks. Same in South Africa. If you go to the Union buildings, if you go to all these establishments, these are places where you think people have made it and that they are accomplished. And I really believe if Christ came back, he wouldn't be in any of these landmarks, historic places. He'd be out in the streets. He'd be out in the villages, in the towns, in the communities where the broken, the battered, and the bruised are. And I'm not saying you don't find the broken, the battered, and the abused in these high class establishments, these places where you only lavish with the upmarket. The people that are there live in a facade or live in a different mindset of not wanting to find the healing and the help. They are wanting to appease the flesh and live out in different places, to try and fill that void. They aren't looking for guidance and help, So it speaks about the fact that you cannot help those who don't want to help themselves. And it's something I learned over the hard way. I learned over the last few years in a very, very hard way or manner or fashion. Once again, by ministering this gospel that I love so dearly, this big, wonderful book of joy brings me every single day. The infallible truth is the fact that giving unsolicited advice is never good advice. So giving unsolicited advice is never good advice. You cannot help those who don't want to help themselves. You cannot speak to someone who doesn't want to hear your message. And a lot of the time you can feel that I love a brother, I love a sister, and I mean physically, whether they're your family members, like I love these people, and I need to say something. If it's not the right time and their heart condition and their posture is not in the right place, you might do a bit more harm than good. So I would say, going back to the example of where would Christ be if he came back right now? He would not be where the glitz or the glam or the light is. If you just heard the social media buzz, Christ is back. Everywhere where people went to go look for him, they wouldn't find him. They would find him in the most deepest, darkest dungeons, going to do what he did when he left this place, And I really believe that is where we should be. That's where we should be to try and help and provide rehabilitation and needing to the ones who want to help themselves. And understanding that he's coming back with a sword can only be explained once someone knows what the gospel is about, knowing that this life they live is purely just here today, gone tomorrow. They are a vessel being used to glorify God's message and make disciples and fishers of men, because ultimately when we leave, this body just becomes dust and ash, whatever we want to call it, but we are going to eternity with him, and we will come back to a new earth, a restored earth, but our souls won't be anymore, So it's a very difficult thing to explain to someone that hasn't come in to the kingdom as yet. But for those that are, even the example I use now, where would we find him, is easier to understand.
Yeah. And I think that's 100%
I don't know if that answered
right.
your question, but
no, I love it. It's a lot to digest. I think you would find Christ in those places, right? Because that's why I love that. I got to find the exact quote, but the church is a house for sinners, not it's a hospital for sinners, not a clubhouse for saints. Yeah, I'll search it in a sec, actually. But in the same way, because that's the thing. Because the reason I bring that up is because there's a lot of where there's division, there's the enemy,
Yes.
And I think Christ would look at anybody. I look at the division, for example. You have like the Westboro Baptist Church will say something like "God hates fags." I don't think Christ would be holding up a sign saying "God hates fags."
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But I also think that he would say that this is not the right way. And again, it takes wisdom to know that. And you could also add me into LGBTQF fornicator, right? So it's this idea that you can just take a subsection of society, put them into a group, and then they're used by people in politics and all that, in this guise of compassion. It's to me, it's not calling us to be our strongest. And I think that this identity can really destroy us, because who are we? You're not your job, you're not your sexuality, you're not these limiting beliefs, but people want to cling on to them. And I think people who truly have compassion and love, Christ being that example. I heard something a while back. I think you'll like this. I think it was from Alan Watts, and he says a good surgeon removes the cancer, but leaves you as attacked. So a good teacher removes that which is a weakness that you identify as, but leaves you intact. And that's not an easy thing to do, because essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to perform surgery, and we're broken, right? So, and that to me is what iron sharpens iron means, right? It's broken brothers coming together saying, we're not going to be broken anymore. We're going to overcome this, and we're going to help other people do it. Who want to your point that you just said, because you're absolutely right. It's a lesson that I actually spoke about with somebody recently about, yeah, you really can help it, because I didn't want help when I was younger. I kind of looked at Christianity and church. I'm like, I've always said in plenty of these podcasts, I always look back at the clock. Like, to me, this was just kind of it was boring. I mean, that's funny, as a kid, the most exciting part that I was looking forward to is we would have after mass, like get-togethers, like, so it'd be cookies and coffee. And that was my favorite part, because that's where the real conversations would happen. And all of the biblical aspect, I'm appreciative of the church now, because I look back and see the symbology and how there's deeper meanings. And, a lot of the things that I remember, they click now. But I was so looking forward to, like, just having conversations with people after and connecting with people, rather than a lot of it can become religious dogma that I think turns a lot of people off. And I think Christ would be like, he would be the one to, like, the homilies, I think, are some of the greatest parts of mass, right? That really separates, like, you're familiar with homily? Like where in the homily with Catholic churches, it would be that moment where the priest would read from the gospel, and then he would take an aspect and just express, he would express his truth in it, not his truth, but he would express his take on it. Right. And so maybe the verse was about, forgive 7 times 77. So he would go into he would share, like, a kind of a short 10-minute speech about what he means, what has touched his heart with forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I could remember there would just be priests who were just kind of like, this is a drag. And then there's others who were just like, yeah, like, that hit home. He's not preaching from the pulpit. He's living it. So, and like you said before too, you can kind of sense it, right? There's discernment, unless you've sinned so much against yourself that you don't know who to trust. And, that those deeper wounds will take more time. But, yeah, I don't even have a question here. I mean, I'm just kind of just.
Man, yeah, I got you. That makes a lot of sense. I never heard of that term homilies before, but it makes sense. I can tell you, I've been in church many different times when I wasn't feeling it, when I had no intention of going, prior to giving my life to the Lord, and post giving my life to the Lord, where I just wasn't up to it, right? And sometimes there's just that spiritual awakening when we need to draw closer or nearer to him. You automatically feel convicted. It's like sometimes when we read a Bible verse and it's just this truth comes to life, because we know we've been living astray, or we've led astray in the last few weeks, years, or months. There's been many times I've been called out in church directly, and I felt that the word was there being ministered to me in that moment, at that time. And in a church of 200, 300, 1,000, however many, I felt that I was the only one. And that pulpit fire was directly on me, like a light beaming, like from God, saying, you sinner. You know what I mean? So we have our moments. We have our moments.
Agreed. And I found that quote. We can end it here. So that's it there.
Church is a hospital for sinners, not a club for saints. Oh, love it.
Right. I mean, that's really, because I think that's what turns off a lot of people to it, right? Because it kind of sets it kind of forgets the message that, and I think I have a curious idea, like, with you. I mean, I'm sure we'll be on the same page with this, is that I put out a post the other day. I said the best kind of therapists get rid of their patients as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So a good doctor, same thing, but now across all industries, it's like, how can I have a customer for life? How can I have a patient for life? But the paradox of that is that no, a good doctor, a good preacher is not someone who wants you to free you from within, these lies that you've believed. Right. So
So yeah, that's really good, eh? And it's all about retention now, eh? Medicating, keeping people back, keeping
yeah,
people from the ultimate true higher purpose, keeping them at their lower self. It's and everything that we look at now is ultimately poison. It really sucks. I was speaking to someone today at a barbecue, was the fact that like we were discussing medical aid or health insurance, and the fact that all these healthcare providers or health insurance providers are regulated by the same authority, right? If you look at all banks and all of these financial or institutions are related to BlackRock, like let's
yes,
in some way, form, or
yeah,
fashion. It's like, well, then you can go as far as saying every bit of the food you consume is related to BlackRock. Every product you've ever used for your sanitary self is related to BlackRock. But then ultimately, we'll be in a position where we just say, God, I'm going to be spiritually fed on your word today. I'll stay in this house. I'll never leave. I'm just going to wither away until I'm with you, Father. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we cannot be in a position where we look at everything that's happening and we don't act because of the atrocities of this world. We've got protection. We've got discernment. We have all these things to know that there are certain things going wrong. But I cannot be in a position where there is no action. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I just want to say thank you, Redmond, for being that example because, you know, this is going back to what we were saying earlier is that, in the same way, I need brothers who are going to keep me accountable.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to help pick me up when I'm falling and that I can shine the way when they're falling. And that's what a true brother is. So I appreciate what you're doing, the work that you're doing. I think it's desperately needed in our world to be a strong man. And I believe that you're being that example. Again, it's through humility and courage. It's not to back down and to be weak. It's to tell people what is true as we come to understand it. And it's to use your testimony, which essentially is humility. But we need courage too to speak what is true in a world that wants to believe a million different truths. So I commend you for doing that and living as an example as a father, right? And for breaking those patterns. And I hope that this message helps somebody in some way. And if you could also share anything, where maybe some links, I can put the links in the description below or where they can find you online. Anything that you wanted to share on that?
Man, I'd love that, man. Thank you once again. It's a great privilege speaking to you again. We've had many chats online, offline, and I love the fact that there's this new wave of men standing up for the abdication of men, to show men that there is another way outside of passivity, that we can come together, that we can stand up, step out, and change our nations, our towns, our countries, a man at a time. It cannot be done in hordes. It needs to be done in a man at a time. And as we do that, the kingdom and God's plan will come to fruition, and we'll get stronger, man. So thank you for the work you do in the podcasts. I'll share my social media handles with you, and I'd love for people to go and look out at some of the messages of encouragement I share. And ultimately, if there's anyone that wants to come to one of my retreats or camps, if they are locally, they can also get all the information on one of my handles.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining me, brother.
Appreciate you, brother.